feminism is a big part of the modern academic religion. And when you are at a church, and a university is a lot like a church, or a madrasa, as you have described it, there is rarely a Q&A session. Or like, hey, wait a second. Maybe the reason why women are making less money is because fewer women are majoring in STEM. Could that be? And so just asking a question can be the act of disbelief. It's like you had to wonder, and the wondering is itself a sin.
Right. Can you start by going into your definition of feminism?
Key point. This is not my definition. When I present a definition, it is an attempt to describe how people actually use the word feminism. I say that a good way of understanding how people use the word feminism in modern English is that feminism is the view that our society generally treats men more fairly than women.
Right. Do you think that's true?
I do not think that it's true. At minimum, it's complicated, because there are a bunch of dimensions where it's plausible that men are indeed treated more fairly than women, but there's a bunch of other dimensions where it is quite likely that men are treated less fairly than women, and then there's a number of other ones where it's just complicated and you really have to get down in the weeds to figure out what's going on.
What could possibly be an example of men being treated less fairly than women in American society?
Let's see. Well, we can start with men are vastly more likely to be at the bottom of society, vastly more likely to be homeless, to commit suicide, to be in prison. Of course, back when we had conscription, men are a lot more likely to get conscripted. In fact, they're the only ones that got conscripted historically. We can also just look at things like workplace accidents and see something like 90% of all workplace fatalities are men. Now, this by itself, you might say, well, maybe more men are in prison because more men are committing murders. That's true. This is where the analysis has to start. We begin by looking at the raw numbers and then asking the next level question, which is why, what's going on? Something that we need to do, of course, for all disparities. Anytime that men seem to be doing worse than women, we should ask, well, maybe it's something about the men's behavior that's causing it. Same thing, though, goes for women. If you see that women are making less money, do not jump to the assumption that women are being treated unfairly. Say, well, maybe there's some good reasons. What could they be?
So when you why is what you just said considered a cancelable offense in the academy?
Good question. Of course, it depends upon which part of the academy. I think a lot of it's just asking questions. Someone goes and says women are being treated terribly, and then you say, well, are they? What exactly is the evidence? Or alternately, someone says women are being especially treated unfairly. It's like, well, they're being treated unfairly, but is it especially so? Don't all human beings endure unfairness? I mean, there's this quote from Hillary Clinton that is in the essay where she says, women are the greatest losers in war because they lose husbands and sons. It's like, well, wait a second. I mean, the husbands and sons actually die, which would seem to be worse by most standards than missing the person who died. I can understand we might have an argument to say perhaps in some ways it is worse to be left behind than to be the one that is dead, but at least on the surface you'd think it would be the other way around. And the way that someone can make a statement like that without expecting anyone to furrow their brow and say, seems odd, little hard to believe that the people that are dead are not the biggest losers here. So I think that's a lot of what's going on. Probably the best way to think about it is that feminism is a big part of the modern academic religion. And when you are at a church, and a university is a lot like a church, or a madrasa, as you have described it, there is rarely a Q&A session. There's rarely a period where you go like, hey, what about the virgin birth thing? Or like, hey, wait a second. Maybe the reason why women are making less money is because fewer women are majoring in STEM. Could that be? And so just asking a question can be the act of disbelief. It's like you had to wonder, and the wondering is itself a sin.
Right. So are you saying that at GMU, an institution that is ostensibly dedicated to the free and open exchange of ideas, there's essentially no pushback whatsoever when some of these parts of the catechism get articulated by the people that run the campus?
I mean,
essentially no?
Well, to be arrogant and say, I am the pushback. I mean, it's not just me. I've got a bunch of friends. But like if you go to an interdepartmental meeting where multiple departments are there, then this catechism would just be accepted as fact. And would they immediately bite your head off for questioning it? Probably not immediately, especially in front of too many witnesses. There's some norm of collegiality, but nevertheless, if you get emails from the administration and reflecting the official view, then the idea is this is our religion, and if you don't believe in that religion, I don't know what's wrong with you, but I'll be like, you're not welcome here, obviously.
I feel like you should be insulted by how few people do try to cancel you. Why do you think that is?
It's one of the great mysteries. And,
what is it about
yes.
you?
I honestly don't know. I've talked to friends about this. Usually, like, getting true self-knowledge is one of the hardest things in the universe.
Yeah.
I never get to be anyone but me. I can talk to my friends, but my friends are so selected by me that it's hard to know whether their view of me would be anything like that of other people. Other people really don't tell you. Anytime a person just comes to me and says, Bryan, you know what your problem is? Like, they got my attention. Like, I'm going to learn something now. I'm going to discover an honest alternative perspective on myself, which, just like most people, that's inherently fascinating. The way that other people see you, really honestly. So, like, one story is just that I got a sense of humor about things, and that's disarming. So maybe that's what's going on. Another one is I just have enough of a buffer where the people that would really hate me don't know I'm alive. Right. So there's that. I'm more of a niche product. The people that like me that know about me tend to like me a lot, and other people just are barely aware of my existence.
Right.
There's that. I mean, there's just the story of good luck. I'm open to that one. So maybe if I get all the extra fame from being on your channel, Rob, then that'll put me over the edge, and then finally they'll come running for me.
I think that also the libertarian label does do a little bit of work, because for some reason, I do feel like it's considered more socially acceptable in like elite progressive circles to be libertarian. Like, it's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily make you an acolyte of evil. Even though they realize you disagree with them, there's some way in which they kind of consider you like a cute eccentricity, as opposed to if you said, I'm a conservative or I'm a Republican.
It's possible that you're right, but I am skeptical. I have this slogan which says, the left is anti-market, the right is anti-left. And again, I call this my simplistic theory of left and right. I know it's not exactly right. That's why I call it the simplistic theory. Right. But I think it does capture so much of what is going on in political disputes around the world over the last 200 years. So I think that actually that anti-market element is so core to the left that this is why libertarians get so much negative attention from them. The number of anti-libertarian pieces written by prominent leftists is crazy relative to the number of libertarians relative to our political influence. We really, relative to our numbers, get under their skin because we are the main people that are saying the opposite of what they are saying.
Yeah.
Right? Now you say, well, aren't there some leftists who see some value in markets? Yeah, I know all that. So, I said, it's the simplistic theory. It's not meant to describe everybody. But still, the core thing that unites the left is complaining about markets. Just like the core thing that unites the right is complaining about the left.
Yeah. So why is it that you specifically tell your daughter not to be a feminist?
Right. This essay is actually written as a letter to my daughter. It is called "Don't Be a Feminist: A Letter to My Daughter." It's written in the second person where I'm saying you this, you that. I'm talking to you. The reason is I love my daughter. I want her to have a really good life, and I think that feminism is one of the views most likely to actually mess up her life in the following ways. First of all, I think it is a view that promotes self-pity, which I think is bad. I think it is bad to feel self-pity. Even if you do have horrible problems, self-pity is bad. If you are terminally ill, and someone says, you know what you should be doing now? Self-pity. It's like, that is not a good thing to do, even when you have every reason for self-pity, but when you don't, when the actual evidence is that conditions are quite good for you, then it's crazy to have self-pity. It is a self-negating psychological attitude, self-fulfilling prophecy. You think things are going to be bad for you, that tends to cause them to be bad for you. Right. Also, I think feminism promotes antipathy, most obviously for men, looking and finding fault in other people, most of whom are actually blameless and are not trying to do anything bad to you. So something else that I say, I really wanted to watch out for, just on a personal level. And then the last thing that I say is, feminism also leads you to treat other people unjustly, right? It leads you to go and ignore presumptions of innocence, to make exaggerated accusations, to not consider the possibility that maybe you are the one that is to blame. These are all, of course, general human traits. All of us have a general tendency to not treat other people that well and to take our own side and to regard the smallest little pain on our finger as being worse than another person having their arm fall off. But feminism is a philosophy that makes a virtue out of this vice and actually really does encourage people, particularly women, to consider very small affronts themselves as being what we could call a federal case, while ignoring ways that they could be mistreating others. And I tell my daughter, look, this is how I've raised you. If the only way to get what you want is to treat other people like dirt, lose. Winning is not everything.
Yeah.
Right. So avoid self-pity, avoid antipathy, and do not treat other people unjustly.
Yeah. Well, you don't really get into it in your essay, but there's ways in which feminism won, and then it needed to come up with reasons to justify its own existence, in America at least, right? Where today, not only have they shattered almost all the institutional barriers to female advancement, on a lot of core metrics, they're doing dramatically better than men.
Sure.
Right? Particularly when it comes to educational attainment and a lot of core professional metrics. But when you've won so bad, you can't just pack up your bags and go home, right? You still need to have some justification for sending the fundraising letters, right? And maybe that's why it comes down to we need to...
Ever greater hypersensitivity.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to that. Although it is important to remember that if you go back to 1950 and say, well, look at how bad things are for women. All right, well, there's a bunch of ways that things were worse for women then than they are today. There's also a bunch of ways that things were worse for men back then.
Yeah.
Back then, the pressure on a man to be a breadwinner for a family is very strong. Right? There is not a lot of flexibility about the male role in 1950. And again, just to look at that time and say the problem is the women are being treated badly, you say, well, maybe just people are being treated worse, and there's just a lot less concern with letting a person be himself or herself.
Yeah.
Right? And again, just to go and say this is about feminism, say, well, isn't it more just about excessive conformity pressure and intolerance, which has nothing to do with gender? So as soon as you use the word feminism, you are singling out female suffering as being, at minimum, bigger and worse. And that's a question that we should say, well, is that really true? Do we know what was going on? Have we even asked? Right? And as I say in the essay, never assume that just because a group isn't complaining that they've got it good. Often the reason you don't complain is that nobody listens to you. Or even worse, you think if you complain, people will bite your head off, and so your life will go from bad to worse. Right? So that's something else to keep in mind. Do not think that complaining is a good index of suffering. It's not.
Right. I mean, part of the reason that we're talking is because you are doing what the structures of the academy are intended to encourage, right? Particularly when it comes to tenure. It's lifetime job guarantee, some level of prestige in a platform. And part of the reason is that that's supposed to let you kind of while out and run large professional risks or societal risks in order to advance this cause of truth-seeking and truth dispersal, right? But you're like a very rare bird. There's not that many of you, of any political... I mean, there's significantly less of the right-leaning version of you, but even on the left, it's a little... It's very... It's even on the left, it's people saying the same standard script, just with slightly different language.
Yeah, or saying things that are controversial off campus, but you don't need tenure.
Yeah, it's not... No one's impressed by you talking about institutional racism.
Yeah.
So what is your theory as to why so many tenured academics are cowards and don't use this remarkable privilege and opportunity to actually do what you're doing, which is throw firebombs into the intellectual discourse?
First of all, humans in general are cowards. Most human beings do not want to rock the boat. They do not want to say things that will upset other people. When you're a little kid, you may open up your mouth and blurt it out, and then everyone gets mad at you. Like, I'm not going to do that again. By the time you're an adult, most people have long since given up on that. There's, of course, a range of personalities. So there's some people who keep antagonizing others fruitlessly. So that's just you need to remember the base rates for what humans are like. Now, professors, in order to get where they are, particularly tenure professors, they have to go through a bunch of filters, every one of which is squeezing out nonconformists and making people very guarded in their language and their thoughts. First, normally you need to be very successful at some prestigious undergraduate school. Then you need to get into some top graduate school. You need to do very well there and make friends there and do things that are original within a narrow framework. Right. Of course, the idea of academic research is you're supposed to be saying something new, That does not mean that you're challenging anything fundamental. Rather, normally you're doing a delta, a tiny tweak on an existing framework and getting accolades for that and generally exaggerating how big the change is.
Right.
And then finally you get a job as a professor. In order to keep that job, you've got to get your peers at that school to go and vote to say that you deserve it based upon your work. Now, after this entire rigmarole, you finally have tenure. If you were a genuine nonconformist, or if you had views that were in fact unpopular outside of academia, it is very likely that you would have been weeded out at one of these many filters.
Yeah.
Right? And then on top of this, also remember that risk-taking generally diminishes with age. So by the time that you are able to speak with little consequence, besides all the filters, you also probably have lost a lot of your desire to do so. You're more mild-mannered. I mean, honestly, I do not think of myself as throwing firebombs. I mean, I am not trying to make anyone angry. People have trouble believing this. In all sincerity, my dream world is one where I say controversial things and people say, that's really interesting, I'm fascinated, tell me more. We have a discussion and then we reach an understanding.
Right.
That's my dream. What I will say is that if there's a topic where I have a controversial view and I know that other people aren't going to like it, I will try to think of the best way to say it, but then I'm still going to say it.
This is another question that's maybe tied to that. We're here at the George Mason University Economics Department, which has really distinguished itself by essentially, it's basically said we're going to go identify a bunch of just super brilliant, kind of provocative, contrarian, libertarian thinkers that might get filtered out through the normal academic hiring process, and we're going to bring them here. These are undervalued assets. And over the course of a couple decades worth of hiring people like that, people that are super smart and are willing to say provocative and orthodox things, but that would have been held against them in a normal academic hiring process. GMU's econ department punches like way above its weight class, right? In terms of level of influence, right? It does. Why is it that there aren't other departments at other schools that are trying something similar?
You have to understand how the hiring process works. Academic departments are workers' cooperatives. Right? And they are workers' cooperatives that have an almost unlimited bank account to fund their activities. They don't need to be successful. They don't even really need students. The money will keep coming in. The worst that could really happen is that you don't get money for new slots. Even that, you might have a donor or whatever. Or if the university's rich, they'll just look the other way at the fact that hardly anyone even wants to take your classes. So that's the first thing to remember. It's a workers' cooperative. Now, in a workers' cooperative, when you don't have these economic constraints, what does matter for hiring? It really comes down to a large degree to, do we like this person? Do we want to have this person? Do we want them on our team? Do we want them on our family? The upshot of this is that in order to go and convince a department to hire a contrarian, you need to have a majority of the department that is pro-contrarian, or at least contrarian friendly. And that means that this isn't the kind of thing where just one innovative person can go and make a difference.
Yeah.
You need to actually have a consensus of we are at least open to hiring contrarians. There's a great piece where they surveyed researchers in social psychology, and they actually asked them explicitly, do you discriminate on the basis of politics? Now you might think, well, of course they do, but they won't admit it. This paper famously found they'll even tell you they're doing it. They consciously admit they're discriminating on the basis of politics. So if you'll have, say, 30 or 40% saying, yes, I consciously discriminate against people who don't share my political views, how many people are there saying, oh, I think it would be really a good idea to burn up one of our special prize slots for a new hire on a person that we disagree with who's going to antagonize a bunch of my coworkers? Right? It's not the way that it's going to work. So you need to reach a critical mass. Basically, the kind of place where this is going to work, in a very small department, you might be able to say, oh, well, there's like 6 people here, 3 are apathetic, there's me and my buddy who want to hire some contrarians, and we got a donor. Then you can do it. But otherwise, it is really difficult to actually hire one contrarian, much less pursue a policy of hiring contrarians.
Right. And what accounts for the fact that you guys were able to pull it off here?
We were over the critical mass. I think that's the honest answer. I mean, we also had help from donors. We had just a lot of esprit de corps here. I mean, our location's been important too. Just being in DC, this means that there's a lot of people really want to be in this area. It's an exciting place if you work with ideas.
Yeah.
So that matters too.
Right. In the book, you talk a lot about happiness. You talk about your own, you self-describe as someone who's pretty happy. it seems like almost by conscious choice.
Mm-hmm.
When you're thinking about your kids and your boys in particular, what's the advice that you have to give them that you would give them an opportunity to replicate your average level of happiness when they become adults?
I mean, honestly, I would give pretty much the same advice for all of my kids, boys, my 3 sons and my daughter. I mean, I think honestly, usually I just try to start with what's known in happiness research. And I'll often mention, by the way, Greek philosopher Epicurus figured this all out 2,500 years ago without the need of any statistics.
Right.
What does it come down to? So starting with the real secret of being happy for a large majority of people, it's not every single human being, there's some variation, but for a large majority of people, is spending a lot of time around people whose company you enjoy. This is what's key. All right. Material possessions, having a lot of money, this is nice. And of course, if you don't have any, then it's bad. But much better to have a modest income and have a lot of good friends and family that you spend a lot of time with than to be super rich and be all alone.
Yeah.
Right? During COVID, I think almost anyone can relate to this, saying, well, a lot of people got a raise, but you're by yourself.
It's not worth
right?
it.
It's sad, it's pathetic, it's desperate.
Yeah.
Right now, I do know there are some very introverted people where I liked COVID better, actually. I mean, even there, it's very unusual to really want to be alone. Most introverts, they want to spend a lot of time around the company of 1 or 2 close friends or relatives. It isn't that they literally want to be alone. There's a few people like that. That's really rare. So it's sort of with just getting your priorities straight, to saying, look, we really want to go and you really want to figure out a way that you can spend a lot of time around people's company that you enjoy. Right? And don't put so much emphasis on money. That's nice, but it is a much lower priority. And then second rule is that once you realize that you're going to be working a lot of your time, you want to be able to find a career where you're going to like working with these people. So you want to find a job where you're going to fit in with your coworkers, where they're going to be fun people. Of course, there's variation here. Every field has some horrible jerks in it, but nevertheless, one where you think that when you're working, you're going to be happy with your coworkers overall. Think about that when you're deciding what kind of job that you want to have. So I would push that too. Let's see. I mean, the Epicurean point of set your expectations low so that you exceed your expectations. This is what Epicurus said. Happiness to a large degree is caused by a disparity between what you expect to happen and what actually happens. When your expectations are here and what happens is here, you're unhappy. If your expectations are down here and what happens is up here, then you are very likely to be happy. So I would focus on that too. Let's see. And then, like a lot of other things, I would just focus on more specific tactical things like, I have a slogan, friendship rules the world. Just try to make friends wherever you go. Right? And don't just say, oh, well, that person would ever be my friend. Like, first of all, you don't know that. Second of all, 10% chance. So, and if you play a 10% chance a lot of times, that's going to add up to an enormous portfolio of people that like you. Do this from an early age so that when you really need a favor, it isn't just someone transparently trying to go and pretend to be your friend in order to get something out of you. Have a big Rolodex of genuine friends that you've amassed over your lifetime. This is another good piece of advice. And I could go on.
Right. Can we talk a little bit also about Nietzsche?
Sure.
I liked your section in the book about reading Thus Spoke Zarathustra for the first time. And this is a theme. There's a theme in a lot of our intellectual heroes on the channel where the idea of the story that everyone is telling about reality versus what reality is itself. And there's a lot of different words for what that is. The simulation or the cathedral or whatever, the matrix, whatever term the person chooses to use. But having spied through that being the essential moment of their life. Your conceptual framework is social desirability bias, which doesn't quite map on exactly, but the idea of
I think it does.
People wanting to be liked, so they just complacently nod their heads when they're told transparently false stories about a given institution or a given environment or a given place. For you, it was false slogans about the Catholic high school you attended.
I went to a public high school, but I went to catechism.
Oh, sorry. But that reading Nietzsche kind of unlocked this. That's where you actually peered through it for the first time. Yeah, can you talk to us about that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in the piece I say, like, Nietzsche, is, like, even to call him a philosopher to me is pretty weird. I think of him as a poet. He doesn't have any actual arguments. It's nothing like real philosophy where you have hypotheticals and thought experiments or give and take. I mean, like, Nietzsche really is, look, here's what I got to say, take it or leave it. I'm not going to try to convince you if you don't like it, tough luck for you. But what I will say is when I first read Nietzsche, I just never read any person in a book just saying that most of what your society believes is just wrong and stupid. And you're really like, this is a published book. This isn't just some stoner like in the back of the room going, man, parents suck. This is like a smart, famous guy like saying, okay, like, you've heard these lies. They're lies. Here's what's really going on.
Yeah.
And like you can read, it's like, why does he know they're really lies? But it's like, well, just the fact that he's sticking his neck out and saying it. So it's not like when you read Walt Whitman or whatever, or the kind of stuff that they're trying to get you to read in school, or John Steinbeck. It's not like they are saying, look, there's a bunch of different lies. They just sort of talk as if everybody believes this stuff already and there isn't much of an alternative. Nietzsche gives you the idea of there's totally an alternative, which is just 999. So whatever you would know. So that was very fun for me at the time.
Yeah.
I did have this Catholic upbringing, and just you just never read anyone criticizing religion in those days. This is before the internet. You can't go to atheist.org or whatever. Yeah. So just like having gone through, what would it be, like 10 years of catechism, like 8 years of going to church every Sunday, and then reading Nietzsche. Is like, well, here's a guy, he seems smart, seems famous, he says this is all wrong. Maybe he's right.
Yeah.
What to say about it?
So, but here's one thing. This actually neatly moves us to the issue of immigration and open borders, because there's times at which I think maybe you go too far past the simulation. Sometimes simulations are necessary for social coordination. Well, in your book, you're pretty open border extremist. I mean, and I think on the raw economic calculation, the idea of some peasant in Honduras, it amounts to an inhumane act of economic sabotage to deny them the opportunity to come and work as a busboy in Fairfax, Virginia. All of which makes total sense to me. But this has come up a lot recently with a lot of people we've talked to. We've talked to some like hardcore immigration restrictionists. We've talked to people that used to be open border maximalists that have now moved towards more the middle ground. But like we talked to Glenn Lowry, Andrew Sullivan, and Charles Murray, and all three of them to a person have said the domestic public policy issue that they've moved farthest away proper libertarianism from is immigration policy. And it's mostly not based upon economics. And I'm going to articulate their position, which basically has become my position. I just want you to respond to it. Which is, a country is more than just its business community and economic activity. A country is held together through creeds and customs, folkways, that it's a properly functioning nation. It's a bunch of people sharing this same fiction about what this group of people is and what they stand for. And that if you plop in enough people that don't ascribe to that same fiction, you end up threatening the functions of that country. And that it can be very disruptive to that cultural cohesion, to have an influx of people that don't buy into the fiction also. I'd say that's honestly Amy Wax's probably that's her main argument. It's not about economics. It's about maintaining this very particular American cultural software. What do you make of that?
Where do you even start? I mean, just to start at the end, it's very odd for someone like Amy Wax, who holds extremely unusual views, to talk about the need to preserve the American culture the way that it is. If you're normal, I can at least understand the appeal of this argument. All the people that you're describing are highly abnormal. They're dissidents. Yeah. So as to why exactly they're so thrilled about preserving American culture as it currently exists, a culture that really and probably would just prefer that they disappear. So that's odd, just at the outset. But in terms of the real argument, is it logically possible that by admitting enough people who are really opposed to the functional norms of your culture, you could mess things up? Of course it's logically possible. When people say, well, I used to believe in open borders, but then I realized a country is more than its economy, I'm like, wow, I've realized that for as long as I can remember, and I still believe in open borders. It can't be that insight is what changed your mind. It's got to be something else. Now, what is going on? Honestly, I think a lot of it is what I just frankly call innumeracy. It's saying, well, there's economic gains, but there's also these other costs, so I think those other costs are bigger. Like, how do you know that? Well, tell me what the size of the gains is, first of all. In the case of estimates of the economic gains from open borders, all the estimates are astronomically large, something like doubling the production of humanity, talking like $75 trillion of gains per year. And then on the other side, people will seriously, not you, but I've met people say, yeah, but what about having to press 2 for English on the ATM machine? It's like, $75 trillion, pressing 2. I mean, like, I cannot use my hands to show the difference in these magnitudes.
Yeah.
Now, when you start saying, okay, well, but what about things that are worse than the ATM machine? Like, what about a decline in trust? Again, they say, well, what exactly is the evidence that this is causing a decline in trust? How big is the decline in trust? How bad is it? In the book, I say, look, there's a bunch of people complaining about trust, and yet I don't know a single human that has actually chosen their location within the United States based upon differences in trust in different parts of America. Right? If you just want to guess at what it is, basically big cities have low trust, rural areas have high trust. I've never heard anyone even suggest, maybe I should move to a rural area where they have better trust because there's all the social science saying trust is good. It's like, yeah, obviously it's not that important.
Right.
Right. Now, in terms of, if you were to push me and say, well, are there any cases where you think this argument has merit? That's why I say there are a few, but it's important to realize how bad things have to get before this argument actually starts to make sense. So I know of 2 cases where immigration very plausibly caused civil war, and that is Palestinians into Jordan and then into Lebanon. All right. Now, this is a case where there's some very special traits to this immigration. First of all, it's suddenly a very large share of the population. Second of all the same group. Third, where a very large share of the group wants a terrible thing to happen, namely war with Israel. All right. You put all that together and you can get bad results.
Right.
Change any of those, though, and I just see very little historical precedent for it being a problem.
Yeah, I guess I'm not. My position on this stuff are still in flux, but the idea.
All right, well, I can save you then, Rob. No, do not go to the dark side.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it seems crazy to say that someone like Charles Murray or Glenn Loury would be enumerate. This is an issue, though, where even people who normally think in terms of numbers just relax their standards and let themselves be swayed by a story on the news.
Yeah.
And a lot of what I'm telling people in all my writing is either do not watch the news because it melts your brain, or watch it realizing the whole time they're trying to show me statistically ultra rare scenarios that are very emotionally affecting, and they're trying to confuse me and lead me to error, and I am not going to let them do it.
I do just think that the argument that they would make is we're going to be insensitive to the adverse economic consequences on the low end of the job skill market, which
Well,
I think
that's a very different argument, of course.
which I think are undeniable, in that while the percentage of people that might suffer a net loss because of unfettered immigration is relatively small, those are still your fellow countrymen. You still have obligations to them. Now I'm packing in a bunch of assumptions that I know you're going to take issue with. And that also allowing that sustained economic suffering to go on for a long period of time will itself cause social dysfunction, I guess is maybe the argument they would make.
Right. Here's the thing, Rob. All progress hurts people. There ain't no such thing as any change that is so great that there are 0 losers. COVID vaccines have been terrible for morticians. They really have. And you say, well, like our most vulnerable people, the morticians, they were expanding their capacity, thinking that people would be dropping like flies for 10 years, and then this stupid vaccine comes along and ruins things. Right. So this, remember, this is a very different argument from this culture and political argument.
Yeah, of course.
The culture and political argument, it's deeper. There's something to it. It requires a lot of thought and knowledge of history to really answer it. But saying that there are some losers from immigration economically is not such an argument. That is just a terrible argument because it would require us to block all progress whatsoever, which no one wants to do.
Right.
All right. So once you accept that, then it's like, well, look, either we say tough luck, which is what we normally say in the face of progress. Your travel agency was put out of business by the internet. Tough luck. Right? That's the normal thing, and I think it's the best thing to do, honestly, when there's progress. Say, look, this is a profit and loss economy, And sometimes bad things will happen, and this is life, and this is what we accept.
Right.
Alternately, you could say, no, that's terrible. There's got to be some government system for helping out losers when there's progress. You'll say, okay, that's way better than saying progress can't happen. And saying we're not going to let immigration because it could hurt the very poorest people in the country, that is like saying there can't be an internet. It's like saying we can't have a vaccine because someone might lose out. Although I would also say that the idea that immigration is definitely bad for people at, say, the bottom of the education spectrum, that's wrong too. There's been a lot of research on differences between immigrant high school dropouts and native high school dropouts. If you think about it for 10 seconds, you could say, are there any differences in the skills these two groups have? Like, probably natives speak fluent English, don't they? Yeah. That means that they are, due to their skills, competing for different kinds of jobs, and often they are complementary. Right? We really will see very commonly that recent immigrants go and work under the management of people who are either less recent immigrants, or maybe they're second generation immigrants who speak both languages. Right? So here we have a case where there's someone who has skills at, say, laying concrete. There's someone else who speaks English, and so they can talk to the customers that want to go and buy that concrete. Right? And so anyway, there's been very good research on this, saying that in places where we have very few immigrants, then we use native English speakers to go and do jobs where you don't really need English to do the jobs, like cleaning hotel rooms.
Yeah. On
the other hand, in places with a lot of immigrants, those low-skilled native English speakers are supervising the immigrants that are actually doing the job. So again, it's not even clear that low-skilled natives lose because they're complementary skills, and this is a big part of understanding how economies work, is these complementarities.
Right. What's your problem with the culture of the IQ realist community?
The problem with the culture of the IQ realist community. So just to be clear, I'm part of this community.
Yeah, define what it is for us.
So IQ realism is the view that, first of all, human intelligence exists. It's not just a cultural construct. And secondly, that IQ tests are a pretty good way of actually measuring intelligence. So I put these two things together. And that's what IQ realism is. I will say I am part of this community. I have done at least a moderate amount of work with IQ myself. I think about this quite a bit. IQ is measures something that is genuinely different between people. It's highly predictive. It's not just a measure of test-taking ability or something like that. But I still say that when I talk to IQ realists, there's still an unusually high probability that they'll say something psychotic. Now again, I'm not talking about people who are leading IQ researchers who, as far as I know, are all decent people.
Yeah, careful academics. Yeah.
Yes, but if I meet a fan of IQ research, say
got a day job.
Yeah. There's like a 1 in 5 chance they start talking about sterilizing people or worse, and it's like, look, we can agree that people differ in intelligence without wanting to get rid of people of lower intelligence. What kind of a crazy idea is this to say, well, that person's not as smart as this other person, so it'd be better if he had never been born. And since he is here, I don't know, maybe sterilize him so he can't make any more of himself. Think about it this way, right? You can say that some people, like Albert Einstein, they're way more productive than normal, and that people who aren't Einstein are less productive. It does not follow that people of lower IQ have a negative productivity, that they are terrible people, that they are causing more harm than good. Like you say, well, aren't some people like that? Yeah, like Charles Manson's like that. Would have been better if Charles Manson had never been born. Right? There are examples like that. But for that to be your default, to say that someone of average IQ or below average IQ, it's better that they didn't exist and they're a parasite, it's like, why would you say that? If the janitor at your business dropped dead, would you say, hooray, he was a worthless person who'd contributed nothing? It's like, that's a crazy thing to think.
Right.
All right. Now, again, the key thing, there's nothing in IQ research that says this is true. This is rather a bizarre and, frankly, psychopathic misreading of the evidence to say, oh, well, some people are smarter than others, so let's get rid of those people who are lower than that. It's like, why would you think that?
But what are the good parts of IQ realism that you think are important?
Well, just for understanding, first of all, why some people are more successful than others. It's one of the best predictors we have. It's especially impressive. IQ you can use to predict success at a young age.
Yeah.
You can give a test at the age of 7, and it is one of the best predictors you can have, whereas you cannot use a child's education at 7 to predict their future success, because at 7 they're all in second grade. Right? So we don't know, like it doesn't really tell us anything.
Right.
You can also use it to say, predict things like, out of 2 siblings, which one is going to be more successful by conventional measures.
Yeah.
So it's one where you get beyond, oh, well, they're both from a privileged family, so you know they're going to do well. No, you don't. If you're in a privileged family, but your IQ is low, then you probably are not going to do all that well. And on the other hand, if you are in an unprivileged family, but your IQ is good, you're probably going to do well indeed. Right? So there's that. There's understanding why there are differences in group success. So we can go and look at the world and say, not every group has the identical IQ. Ashkenazi Jews come out at the highest of any group that's ever been tested. Perhaps this, rather than a Jewish conspiracy, explains why Jews have been so incredibly successful in science, literature, movies, academia, and so on. At least it's another story about why Jewish success than whatever else you might say.
Than whatever Kanye said was recently.
Yeah. I don't know what he said, but yeah, like possibly.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of, I think.
But guys, back up though.
Yeah.
And again, I assume you did this. I have not. But there is something that feels something is unspeakably a little bit icky about me subjecting my 7-year-old to an IQ test. You know what I mean? Like that idea that you start. It's very difficult for it not to have a normative characteristic to it or a sense of predestination to it. You know what I mean? And maybe that's because there's baggage you carry with it that's not actually in the test. But
yeah, I mean,
you know what I mean?
Yeah. I will say that is all baggage.
Yeah.
Like honestly, let me just give an example. When I'm teaching math to my son, like he doesn't always immediately get it. And then I try to cheer him up and I say, you know who also didn't always immediately get algebra? Me. And then, but sometimes I'll say, okay, do you know who did get it the first time he heard this at a younger age than you or me? University of Texas computer genius Scott Aaronson.
Yeah.
Right. And then, and I say, why am I telling you this, son? He's like, because to realize you don't have to be. I'm not Scott Aaronson. There's no chance of me being Scott Aaronson.
Yeah.
But I've done okay. Right?
Yeah.
You don't have to have that level of intelligence to enjoy success in life. So I mean, honestly, I can understand why it does feel icky, and I mean, partly as a parent, you just don't like to hear anything about your kid being anything less than the greatest kid in the universe.
Right.
Right. But still, I think it is helpful just to understand, right? Well, what's realistic? Now, just to say, well, what's realistic is to have the average performance determine your IQ. No, you can do better than the average for your IQ. But remember, that includes a whole bunch of lazy smart people. So, and I will also say, I know a bunch of smart people have been total failures. Right? You can beat them, that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So, I mean, it is one where, do you want to go and hide the truth and sugarcoat it and just make decisions while not understanding what's really going on? I say that one of the best lessons you can give your kids is to face facts, not sugarcoat reality, but also not think of things as being more predetermined than they really are. And say, look, this is what we got. This is what we're starting with here. We still have a ton of options. To go and say, oh, this will never work. Wrong, false. It might not work in any particular case. Then we just try harder. We try more times. We experiment. We look at things that seem like they're promising. And always remember, almost everything fails. In life, almost every life plan you ever had as a child turned out to be a bad plan in hindsight. But it was still very good that you were trying things, because if you have no plans at all, you don't try anything, then you end up nowhere.
Trying is fun, too. Being on the quest is fun. It's almost as fun as actually achieving it, frankly.
It can be. Depends upon how badly you
I don't know.
fail.
I just finished Will Smith's memoir, and after talking about how he was the most successful movie star in the history of Hollywood, he goes through a midlife crisis at 50 and spends 2 years doing ayahuasca and letting his wife bully him into an open relationship, and it all culminates in the slap at the Oscars. So I'm just much more, I'm open to the idea of material success not being as important for happiness as...
Yeah. I mean, I'm always thinking about success as getting paid to do something you like doing.
Yeah.
And a big part of getting paid to do something you like doing is getting paid to do something you like doing with people you like doing it with.
Yeah, yeah. Can we end then on your advice on how to cultivate happiness amidst the ever-present catastrophe of human existence?
Yeah, you can just look at the news. Every day there's horrible stuff that happens on Earth.
Yeah.
You can look at that and say, how could I possibly be happy on a day that a child died in Ukraine? Right? And it's like, well, do you know that there's a lot more that happens that's bad every day than what you saw in the news? A large multiple. So in the book, I calculate probably about 1,000 people are murdered on Earth every day, average day. All right, and you realize that, it's like, gee, so something like roughly 1,000 times as bad as that thing that made me sad happens every single day. What am I to do? And I say, look, really, you've got two choices. One is just to be miserable all the time, right? And the other choice is to say, all right, well, it's a big world. So if in a world of 8 billion people, there's just going to be a lot of really bad stuff, but there's also tons of great stuff that's happening, and I want to be part of the great stuff that's happening. I'm going to go and do the most that I can to get value out of this incredible gift that I have of being alive. Every human being, you are a winner of an absurdly unlikely lottery, right? You know, every batch of sperm, you're the winner, right? How did that happen? Highly unlikely, but here you are.
Yeah.
Once you've won, you can either say, I'm going to try to make the best use of this gift that I can and try to enjoy life every day, right? Or you can say, well, in a world this big, there's so much suffering. I mean, like I will say, like, if you just step back, so, well, what if there were like 8 quintillion people? Then there would be really horrible stuff happening every day just based upon sheer population. Does it really make sense that your personal happiness should depend upon the total population of the universe? That's a weird idea, isn't it? So once you put that aside, then say, look, like, it's philosophically sad that these things are happening. If there's some practical way of doing something about it, I'm interested. But otherwise, I'm not going to worry about that, and I'm going to focus on the positives and focus on what I can do with my life to have a good day. Right? You know, furthermore, I would add the idea that you should let the, let's just say, epistemically unreliable people in the media to decide whether you're allowed to have a good day or not, to me is crazy. Right? See the people on TV, they're not wise people. They're not thoughtful people.
Yeah.
They are in the business of spreading hysteria and misery and antipathy, right? That's the way they've chosen to make their money, right? I don't want to support it. And for people like that to be the ones that decide whether you're happy today or not, I think that is just absolutely insane.
Yeah.
Who the hell are they to decide that out of the 1,000 murders that happen, today there's one that bothered them and therefore it should bother you? Come on.
Well, it seems like the most important thing is that meta strategy, which is recognizing that happiness is to a large extent a choice.
Yeah.
Some of it's about, it's the choice of what, if you're cultivating the good habits that we know lead to flourishing. And also there's the raw data of the universe. What is the story framing you're going to put upon it? Right. And again, to circle back to the very beginning, if you adopt fourth, fifth wave feminism, it's the maximally self-pitying, maximally negative, maximally self-involved story. Oh, yeah. Which is not going to maximize your flourishing. There are other stories that can be told. Okay. Right. Julian Simon, who's best known for his work on The Ultimate Resource, he also had a book on depression that's very good called Good Mood, Ultra Epicurean, where he says, the main cause of unhappiness is negative self-comparisons. It's right out of Epicurus, saying, look, if you think things should be up here and they're actually down here, then that tends to make you unhappy. If you get your expectations down to a realistic level, then it is possible to be happy, and he has a lot of useful advice for doing that. I mean, honestly, this is a case where I'd say many people would be better if they just stopped watching the news and just focused on things that are in your control. Yeah. Feeling out of control also makes people feel unhappy. Yeah, stoic distinction, very important. But now again, of course, the true stoic idea is your happiness would just be independent of anything going on in your life. And I say that's just not descriptive of how human beings can actually be. What human beings really need is to spend a lot of time in the company of people that they like being around. That's something you can do. That's where be friendly. If you're naturally shy, go out of your way to try to meet people anyway. If you feel like I can't meet that many, do a budget. Every day I'm going to at least try to talk to one person, make one friend, see what happens. Yeah. I'm going to make an investment. I'm willing to be less happy for a while in order to be more happy in the future. Honestly, I think that's also a lot of the problem that people who feel depressed are in, is they currently feel bad enough that when you say, look, things can improve, but you're going to have to make yourself less happy for a while on purpose before they can improve. And they're like, no, I can't handle that. And it's like, look, you just got to steel yourself here. If you don't like your job, then you're going to have to keep doing that job, plus you're going to have to do something to get a better job. And that's going to make your life harder for a while.
but that's the only way to get out of the situation. You can either complain and say, woe is me, right? And maybe there's some reason to do that, but it is not a constructive thought. Constructive thought is to say, I don't want this to happen forever. What do I have to do here? I remember the way that I motivated myself to study for comprehensive exams at Princeton. I was not having fun. Was to say, well, look, I can either suffer for a month and pass the test now, or I can go and let it weigh me down for a month, not be prepared, and then have to retake it and do it all over again. That got me studying all day, every day. I don't want to have this hanging over my head ever again. I'm going to suffer right now on purpose. I know what's happening. I'm going to feel the burn, and then I'm going to get through this to a better way.